Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only show where we take the economic dumpster fires of the world, douse them in satire, and light a match just to see how big the explosion gets. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest economic circus act, courtesy of none other than Donald J. Trump, who's decided to slap a 100% tariff on semiconductor imports while simultaneously handing out exemptions like candy at a parade. And who's the golden child of this tariff tantrum? You guessed it, Apple Incorporated, the trillion-dollar tech titan that's apparently too big to tariff. Buckle up, folks, because this is going to be a wild ride through the twisted funhouse of global trade, corporate cronyism, and economic nationalism gone haywire. Now, if you've been living under a rock, or, let's be honest, just trying to survive the inflation apocalypse, you might have missed Trump's latest Oval Office stunt. Flanked by Apple CEO Tim Cook, the former president-turned-tariff czar declared that any company importing semiconductors into the US will face a 100% tariff. That's right, folks, 100%. But wait, there's a catch. If you're a company like Apple, and you promise to bring production back to the US, you get a magical get-out-of-tariff jail-free card. Oh, and just to sweeten the deal, Apple's Tim Cook announced a shiny new $100 billion investment in US manufacturing. Coincidence? I think not. This, my friends, is what happens when economic policy meets reality TV, drama, favoritism, and a whole lot of economic collateral damage. Let's start with the obvious, shall we? A 100% tariff on semiconductors sounds like a bold, America-first move, right? I mean, who doesn't want to stick it to those pesky foreign chipmakers and bring manufacturing back home? But here's the kicker, folks, this isn't economic nationalism, it's corporate cronyism dressed up in a stars and stripes suit. Why? Because the exemptions are where the real story lies. Apple, TSMC, Samsung, SK Hynix, all the big dogs are getting a pass, as long as they pledge to invest in the US. And let's not kid ourselves, these pledges aren't exactly new. According to Bloomberg, the $1 trillion in collective investment pledges from tech giants since Trump's return to power. A lot of that was already in the pipeline, folks. TSMC, for example, had already committed to building factories in Arizona back in 2020, with plans to invest over $40 billion by 2025. Samsung. They've been expanding in Texas since 2021, with a $17 billion chip plant set to open in 2024. These aren't new commitments, they're just rebranded PR stunts to appease the tariff gods. And let's talk numbers, shall we? Semiconductors are the lifeblood of the global economy. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, the global chip market was worth $555 billion in 2023, and it's projected to hit $1 trillion by 2030. The US consumes about 47% of the world's semiconductors, but here's the kicker, we only produce 12% of them domestically. The rest? Imported, mostly from East Asia. Taiwan's TSMC alone accounts for 55% of global chip production, while South Korea's Samsung and SK Hynix dominate memory chips. So, a 100% tariff on imports sounds like a great way to kneecap the US economy, right? Wrong. Because Trump's not actually going after the big players. He's going after the little guys, the smaller firms that can't afford to build billion-dollar factories in the US to buy their way out of the tariff trap. This, folks, is textbook cronyism, protecting the corporate giants while throwing the minnows to the sharks. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, shall we? The global electronics supply chain is already a mess, thanks to decades of globalization. For years, companies like Apple, Nvidia, and AMD have relied on a complex web of suppliers stretching from Taiwan to South Korea to China. And why not? It's cheap, efficient, and, until recently, pretty darn reliable. But then came the pandemic, the US-China trade war, and now Trump's tariff tantrum, and suddenly, everyone's scrambling to reshore or friendshore their supply chains. Sounds great in theory, right? Bring jobs back to America, stick it to China, and make the US a manufacturing powerhouse again. But here's the problem, folks, globalization isn't a light switch you can just flip off. Take this little guy, for example. Your average smartphone contains components from dozens of countries, assembled in places like India and Vietnam, with chips designed in the US but manufactured in Taiwan. According to a 2024 report from McKinsey, building a fully self-sufficient semiconductor supply chain in the US would take at least a decade and cost upwards of $1 trillion. And even then, you'd still need raw materials from places like China, which controls 60% of the world's rare earth minerals, those pesky little elements that make your chips work. So, when Trump says, build in America, and you're exempt, what he's really saying is, good luck untangling a supply chain that's more complicated than a soap opera love triangle. And let's not forget the collateral damage. Trump's not just threatening tariffs on chips, he's hinting at levies on all products containing semiconductors. That's right, folks, your car, your fridge, your smart toaster, even your kid's talking teddy bear. According to the Consumer Technology Association, the U.S. imported $378 billion worth of consumer electronics in 2023, and nearly all of it contains chips. A 100% tariff on those products would jack up prices faster than you can say, supply chain meltdown. And who pays the price? You guessed it, you, me, and every other poor sap trying to afford a new iPhone or a car that doesn't cost more than a house. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the apple in the Oval Office. Apple's $100 billion investment pledge is being hailed as a victory for Trump's America First agenda, but let's not kid ourselves, this is a masterclass in corporate lobbying. Apple's been playing this game for years, folks. Back in 2019, during Trump's first term, the company secured tariff exemptions for its China-made products by promising to invest $350 billion in the U.S. over 5 years. Fast forward to 2025, and they're pulling the same trick, only this time, the stakes are higher. With Trump threatening tariffs on India, where most iPhones are now assembled, and Vietnam, where Apple Watches and iPads are made, Tim Cook knew he had to throw the White House a bone. And what a bone it is, $100 billion, plus a promise to create 1,000 jobs annually. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the catch, Apple's total U.S. investment over the next 4 years is now $600 billion, which is only $39 billion more than what they'd already planned. In other words, folks, this is less of a game changer and more of a PR stunt. And let's talk jobs, shall we? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. manufacturing sector has been bleeding jobs for decades, with employment dropping from 17 million in 1990 to 13 million in 2023. Apple's promise of 1,000 new jobs annually. That's a drop in the bucket, folks, less than 0.01% of the manufacturing workforce. Meanwhile, the real winners here are Apple suppliers, like Corning, which is getting a shiny new factory in Kentucky, and Texas Instruments, which is cashing in on the chip boom. But here's the kicker, most of these investments are in high-tech, automated factories, not the blue-collar assembly lines Trump's base is dreaming of. According to a 2024 study by the Economic Policy Institute, automation has already displaced 1.5 million U.S. manufacturing jobs since 2000, and that trend is only accelerating. So, while Trump's busy slapping tariffs on foreign chips, the real job killer isn't globalization, it's robots. And finally, folks, let's talk about the global fallout, because this tariff tantrum isn't just America's problem, it's the world's problem. Trump's not just targeting semiconductors, he's going after entire countries. India, a key production hub for Apple, is facing 50% tariffs, partly as punishment for buying Russian energy. Vietnam, another Apple manufacturing base, is getting hit with 20%. And China? Well, let's just say the US-China trade war is about to go from cold to thermonuclear. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Trump's first round of tariffs on China in 2018 cost U.S. consumers $40 billion annually in higher prices, and that was with tariffs averaging just 25%. A 100% tariff on semiconductors and electronics? That could easily double or triple the damage, pushing inflation, already a sore spot after hitting 9.1% in 2022, back into the danger zone. And let's not forget the retaliation, folks. China, India, and the EU aren't just going to sit back and take this lying down. Back in 2018, China slapped tariffs on U.S. agricultural exports, costing American farmers $27 billion in lost revenue, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This time around, the stakes are even higher. China could restrict exports of rare earth minerals, which the U.S. relies on for everything from chips to electric vehicles. India could hit back with tariffs on U.S. tech services, which account for $60 billion in annual exports. And the EU? Well, they've already threatened to retaliate against Trump's steel tariffs with levies on American whiskey, motorcycles, and jeans. In other words, folks, we're not just talking about a trade war, we're talking about a global economic cage match. So, what's the takeaway from all this, folks? Trump's tariff tantrum is less about bringing jobs back to America and more about flexing political muscle, rewarding corporate cronies, and stirring up chaos for the sake of headlines. Sure, Apple and TSMC might build a few more factories in the US, but the real cost will be borne by consumers, small businesses, and the global economy. And let's not forget the irony here, Trump's big plan to make America great again relies on foreign companies like TSMC and Samsung to do the heavy lifting, because the US simply doesn't have the capacity to produce advanced chips at scale. According to a 2024 report from the Boston Consulting Group, building a fully domestic chip supply chain would require $1.2 trillion in investment and 15 years of effort. Good luck with that, tariff man. So, to all you ordinary folks out there worried about your finances, and to all you finance pros trying to make sense of this madness, here's my advice, brace yourselves, because the economic clown show is just getting started. And remember, here at Boss Economics World, we'll be here to laugh, cry, and throw shade at every absurd twist and turn. Until next time, keep your wallets close and your tariffs closer.